Thank you all very much. It's been a wonderful evening, and it was great to see so many people connecting with friends and colleagues. It's extraordinary. And now it's time to move on with our program. Tonight we are honored to welcome Mayor Richard M. Daley. As you all know, for over 2 decades, Mayor Daley has presided over our fine city, spearheading countless programs that have resulted in the thriving metropolis we are proud to call Chicago. In deciding not to run for re-election, he marks the end of an era, one that has boasted a Daley at Chicago's helm for 42 of the past 55 years. The fourth of 7 children, Richard Michael Daley was 13 when his father was elected mayor in 1955, a title he would hold until his death 21 years later. As you also know, the first Mayor Daley was the longest-running mayor in city history until this past December when his son surpassed his record. The quintessential Chicagoan, Mayor Daley was born and raised in Bridgeport. After graduating from De La Salle Institute, he attended DePaul University for college and law school. His first foray into the public arena was as a delegate to the 1969 Illinois Constitutional Convention. Next, he won a seat in the Illinois Senate in 1972. In 1979, he won the position of Cook County State's Attorney by just 0.2%. He was the county's top prosecutor for a decade. He began his reign as mayor on April 24, 1989, which also happened to be his 47th birthday. Since then, he has been re-elected 5 times, claiming over 70% of the vote in 1999, 2003, and 2007. Having taken over at a critical time for our city, Mayor Daley kept Chicago from falling into post-industrial Rust Belt obscurity. While many other cities in the region struggled to remain relevant, Chicago grew in population, income, and diversity as it transitioned from a manufacturing to a service economy, quickly becoming the global capital of the Midwest. Under the mayor's leadership, Chicago has led the nation in countless initiatives: the installation of neighborhood cameras to prevent crime, the enactment of legislation to combat predatory lending, a bold assault on handguns, and a push for those now famous green rooftops. He renovated Navy Pier and in so doing transformed it into Chicago's most popular tourist attraction. His modernization of the Chicago Transit Authority aided the rapid development of the city's north, near south, and west sides. Frustrated with the dismal state of Chicago's public schools, the mayor made a gutsy move when he asked the Illinois legislature for control in 1995. Poorly performing schools were closed, new teachers were hired, and test scores improved while dropout rates declined. As a result of his perseverance and hard work, more students are now prepared to pursue some form of higher education, and schools previously labeled the worst in the country have become a national model of reform. Perhaps one of his most ambitious undertakings was the 2004 opening of Millennium Park, a stunning centerpiece of world-class art, architecture, landscaping. From the Frank Gehry-designed Pritzker Pavilion to Wrigley Square, to the interactive Crown Fountain, to the captivating Cloud Gate sculpture, more commonly known as the Bean, the mayor's vision turned an abandoned rail yard into a true urban oasis. And many of you here involved in the Economic Club were very involved in helping to come together as a business community to help make sure the Millennium Park came to fruition. This and other concerted efforts to beautify Chicago have been met with widespread appreciation by citizens and visitors alike. As many know, the mayor's father was known for asking, "What trees do you plant?" Well, it seems his son took him literally. At one point, Chicago bought so many trees the region's nurseries ran out. I was president of the Chicago Park District at the time and experienced the mayor's arbor passion firsthand. After visiting Paris, he decided to add flowers and planters to some of our most noteworthy boulevards, including Michigan Avenue. And how can any of us forget that controversial decision to close Meigs Field? Of course, Of course, we all know the outcome. Those runways are now a park. In his day, Montgomery Ward had a vision that Chicago's lakefront would be forever open, clear, and free. Well, it seems our mayor shares that view. These and many other efforts have appropriately earned him the nickname Mayor Daisy. He has literally received too many honors to count, but let's list a few. He has been named Municipal Leader of the Year by American City and County Magazine, Public Official of the Year by Governing Magazine, and Politician of the Year by the Library Journal. In 2005, Time Magazine called Mayor Daley the nation's top urban executive. As we all know, Mayor Daley is the father of Nora, Patrick, Elizabeth, and the late Kevin Daley. He is also a devoted husband to Maggie, our much beloved First Lady of Chicago. A force of nature in her own right, Maggie has tirelessly championed after-school matters from a fledgling idea to a remarkable citywide success. Chicago will always be the city that works, but we just may have to work a little harder without Mayor Daley. On May 16th, the 5th floor will have a new occupant with some enormous shoes to fill. Please help me welcome a man whose reputation for getting things done will leave an enduring legacy in Chicago and beyond, Mayor Richard M. Daley.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, John, for those kind remarks, and to the Board of Directors, the Economic Club, to all the members and guests, good evening. It's always a pleasure to appear at the Economic Club of Chicago. I come before you at a time when the struggling world, national, state, and local economies present a great challenge for cities all over the world. But that kind of challenge is nothing new to Chicago. Let me read something to you from the Chicago Tribune in 1981. The series was called City on the Brink. The first story in the series began, and I quote, "The city of Chicago has become an economic invalid. The condition may be permanent unless the people responsible for its economic future can reverse the long, steady, and seemingly endless slide. Chicago is losing the industry that it was its original reason for existing, has found nothing to replace it. Often, cities stricken in this way become irrelevant. Business moves away. So do the best young people. The population ages. The city becomes a backwater. And that's not what happened here in Chicago. Metropolitan areas around the world are more important than ever before. It is simply not possible to survive, let alone thrive in the 21st century, without being closely linked, physically linked, to all the complex pieces of a modern economy. Metropolitan areas bring together the ingredients for economic success: ideas, infrastructure, culture, capital, educational opportunities, a diverse pool of talented people. For example, we use those ingredients differently than Groupon. Our job as civic leaders is to make the ingredients available and let the firms build their own successful recipes. The Chicago region is alive and thriving. The city of Chicago is the heart of that region. We have become a successful 21st century global city. Of course, our capacity to reinvent ourselves is nothing new. Through almost 200 years of history, the characteristic that I believe has become to define our city has been its ability to rebound, to adapt, and to evolve. Here's what Mark Twain wrote about Chicago in 1883, and I quote, "It is hopeless for the occasional visitor to try to keep up with Chicago. She outgrows his prophecies faster than he can make them. She is always a novelty, for she is never the Chicago you saw when you passed through the last time." End of quote. Chicago is a great city today because we had leaders of vision, but vision alone is not enough. In Chicago, we just don't dream, we do. Rebuilding our city after the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, becoming the nation's railroad center, then its aviation center, creating from nothing the magical world of the Columbian Exposition in 1893, inventing the skyscraper, surviving the Great Depression, and coming out stronger than before, evolving from one of the greatest manufacturing cities in the world to one that's also a center of innovation, technology, international commerce in both manufactured goods and services. Chicago has made great progress because we've addressed our problems head-on in a way that is pretty basic. If something doesn't work, try something new. We see problems and we fix them. I come before you tonight to share 4 basic thoughts about where Chicago is today and where we need to go. The first one is arguably the most important. I want to thank the people in this room for providing our city's business and civic backbone. I strongly believe that much of the progress we have made in Chicago over the years has been made possible by the business community that is fully engaged in our goal of improving the quality of life for every resident of our city. Other cities have public-private collaborations, but nothing has anything as broad and as deep as the partnerships we have developed here in Chicago. The perfect example of that is the Civic Consultant Alliance, which has given many years of service to the City of Chicago and other units of local government in the Chicago area. The residents of the area may not realize it, but their local governments are more effective as a result of the hard work and dedication of the Civic Consultant Alliance. I want to personally thank the Board of Directors, all the volunteers from all the corporations here in the City of Chicago that has made a difference in evaluating and coming up with performance standards, looking at waste and inefficiency in government. I personally want to thank all the business leaders. That type of relationship doesn't develop automatically. It has to be nurtured by a spirit of trust and collaboration. What business needs is a government that's willing to work with business for the good of all the people of our city. Government doesn't control the economy directly. There is no knob that it can turn to create jobs and prosperity, or if there is, I haven't found it yet. What government can do is to provide an environment in which the private and business sector thrives. That is what we will create jobs and prosperity for the next generation of our citizens of our region. You need only look at the success recently in gaining business investment, expansion to appreciate that we are on the right track with our strategy. In the past 2 years, major national, international companies have selected Chicago for their corporate headquarters or expand their presence, including Willis, Ford, Miller Coors, United, Whirlpool, Crate & Barrel, Infinite Capital Management, Veolia Environment, which is the world's largest environmental services company in the world. Overall, the world business, Chicago has identified 232 major commercial and industrial expansions that were announced under our development or completed in our region in 2010. World Business Chicago has been crucial to spreading the word that our city is a great place to live and do business. We have forged relationships with great global businesses of the region, Boeing and Caterpillar, for example, because what benefits the region benefits Chicago. Businesses succeed in our region because we can provide them with a strong, vibrant talent pool from world-class universities, a central location with easy access to the world, and outstanding quality of life. And that brings me to the second issue. What makes a city work in the 21st century? What should we be striving to do as a modern metropolitan region? The answer is that we must create and attract the ingredients for economic success. Many of these ingredients, global capital, talented professionals, aspiring entrepreneurs, can go anywhere. We must do things that make them want to be here. Of course, the single most important issue we deal with is education. And that is how we make every resident of Chicago more productive in the long run. And that is how we attract and retain the kind of talented professionals who will only live in a place with great educational choices. Soon after becoming mayor, I faced with a public school system that was broken. I was the first mayor in the country to ask the state government to give me the responsibility for fixing it. Believe me, they're only too happy to give it to me. We've abandoned the one-size-fits-all model, created targeted schools that focus on specific academic areas, like world languages and math and science. For example, we offer world language programs in 11 languages with 100,000 students participating at 336 schools around the city. These programs include Chinese, Russian, Arabic languages spoken by billions of people around the world. You can debate what our next steps should be, but no one can ignore that we put our schools on the right track. I want to thank all the business and not-for-profit community for their support of the charter school options here in the city of Chicago. The choice that charter schools provide elevates educational standards, accountability in every neighborhood of our great city. But a successful city is only a place where people want to live, work, and visit. We have undertaken hundreds of initiatives aimed at making Chicago the most environmentally friendly city in the nation, and I say the world. At every point, we have used government to lead by example. The first green roof was on City Hall. And at every point, we have advanced our environmental strategy in partnership with the private sector. The result is a collaboration that makes good business sense and not a set of rigid regulations raining down from above upon businesses. Let me give you a few examples of things we have done here over the years to improve the natural environment and make people's lives better. Working with leaders from the business and non-for-profit sectors, state and local government officials, and residents, we created the Chicago Climate Action Plan, a comprehensive, detailed strategy to help lower greenhouse gases, emissions, and address climate change. Our Green Homes program is for the builders and developers who are constructing new residential units in Chicago or renovating existing units. It gives points to builders for every sustainable technique and material used in the construction of a new home or a residential building, and can qualify the projects for expediting permits, which are important in Chicago. Every now, even down in the middle of the economic downturn, Chicago is using every available tool to improve the environment. For example, we use the funds from the federal stimulus program to create approximately 650 jobs for formerly incarcerated persons to do such things as deconstructing city-owned buildings, preparing deconstructed materials for reuse, planting trees and landscaping, offering green job training and work experience in the growing fields of locally grown organic agriculture, handmade sustainable products, recycling services, and many more. We continue to monitor our policies and gather feedback from businesses so we can stay at the cutting edge of what it means to be a modern green city in the world. Our business community is stepping up the environmental area as well. For example, A. Finkel & Sons, the mid-sized steel company that has been in business on the north side since 1902, is deeply committed to tree planting reforestation. It has created the Foraging a Fresher America program to plant 6 million trees in protected forests in Wisconsin and Illinois. Finkel is also building a new state-of-the-art environmentally friendly manufacturing plant on the south side that will create new opportunities for residents in Burnside, Calumet Heights, and the Pullman community on the south side of the city of Chicago. The bottom line is this: environmentalism makes economic sense. When a city exists in harmony with the environment, it looks better and feels better. It's a place where talented people who can go anywhere will select to live in Chicago. That said, the 21st century is not different from the 20th century in one important respect. We still must build and maintain infrastructure that works. 100 years ago, that meant ensuring that coal barges could arrive at steel plants. Today, it means making sure the 787 Dreamliner can get from Chicago to Shanghai without delay. It's the same basic idea. We have to move people. We have to move goods. We have to move information. There is another way to think about all this. Suppose 5 years ago I had convened a meeting of 50 smartest people in this room. You know who you are. And I know I had asked this group to come up with a strategy for making sure that Groupon was founded in Chicago and that 3,000 jobs and probably a lot more to come. Of course, that would have been an impossible assignment, since no one ever heard of Groupon 5 years ago. How can you attract something that you can't even imagine? But I've just told you the answer. Build a city where something like Groupon can happen. Great universities, safe streets, good schools, state-of-the-art digital infrastructure, a quality of life that will attract people who can do things and the rest of us can't even imagine, not even the 50 smartest people in this room. Once that idea was imagined, then the city supported it. I am very proud of the city's support. World Business Chicago assisted Groupon in receiving state tax credit that helped the company expand. And the city invested $28 million in tax increment financing fund to help redevelop the former Montgomery Ward's catalog house at 600 West Chicago Avenue into a mixed-use development. That building has been a great success, and Groupon is one of the many visionary tenants who are identifying opportunities, taking risks to develop new processes, design new products, and open new markets. It is a thriving example of how government can support the technology industry in a way that improves the quality of life for every resident of Chicago. Chicago has become more than just the city that works. And the third thing I want to discuss this evening is Chicago's role as a global city. The people in this room recognize that the economic future of our city depends on our willingness and ability to seek opportunities in the Americas, in Asia, Europe, Africa, and around the world. I suspect that some of you will be up late tonight making conference calls to other continents. Right now, it's just about 7 a.m. in India, as many of you know, have probably come to know. Since I became mayor, Chicago has evolved from a regional and national economic center into a city that has taken a prominent place as a leader in the global economy. Standards & Poor's now ranks Chicago among the world's top 10 economic centers. Last summer, Foreign Policy magazine ranked Chicago number 6 among the global cities in the worldwide, behind only New York, London, Tokyo, Paris, and Hong Kong. That ranking was based on how much influence a city can have beyond its own borders, its ability to manage the global recession. We no longer compete with just other cities in the United States. We compete with cities all over the world for jobs, for business, for tourism, and residents. We also collaborate with firms and governments and universities around the world. We send our children to study in Europe, Asia, and South America. We attract students from those same places. Chicago businesses depend on inputs from China, India, and Brazil, and that's where we sell our products to. The future well-being of cities like Chicago depends to a large degree on how we can plan for and deal with that global interconnection. For example, I have supported the long-delayed free trade agreements with Colombia and the trade agreements with South Korea that the President will soon submit to Congress. Of course, the point is not to become a global city for the sake of becoming a global city, as if it were some kind of reward that you would win or a T-shirt that you get when the rankings come out. The point is that our growing global prominence to continuously create new jobs and opportunities for our business and residents. Ironically, Chicago has earned the place on a global stage because we work so effectively as a region, rather than pitting the cities against suburbs or by allowing politics to divide us. In 1997, I organized a Metropolitan Mayor Caucus here in the Chicago area, a partnership of 273 cities that now serve as a model for other regions. We have gained economic status by operating as a capital of the American Midwest. For example, I recently met with officials of American United Airlines in an attempt to come up with an agreement about moving ahead with the O'Hare modernization program. O'Hare is our connection to the rest of the world. Its efficient operation is essential for our ability to compete in the global economy and to make Chicago the type of place where people want to live, work, and raise a family. We must complete the project. We also need greater support from the federal and state governments for public transportation. Think about the transportation evolution that I described about at the beginning of this speech: ships, trains, and then planes. Chicago has prospered for 200 years by anticipating the nation's transportation needs and then getting there first. Of course, our waterways still matter enormously. Lake Michigan is one of the largest bodies of fresh water in the world. The 20th century may have been about oil. The 21st century is going to be about water. I organized a Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities initiative to bring local leaders from the United States and Canada together to work towards protecting the environment and economically valuable waterways. Do you remember that Chicago on the Brink story from 1981 that I mentioned at the outset? The story quoted a professor of urban science who said, and I quote, "I see very little hope for locating economic activities here again," end of quote. The story also quoted the British magazine The Economist, which had called the Loop a facade of downtown prosperity. They said we were done. Chicago's obituary was written. It was just a matter of waiting for the last gap. Well, we're not done, and our city did not die. To the contrary, The Economist magazine came back in 2006, exactly 25 years after those dire stories were written, to do a special report on Chicago that pronounced us very much alive. The story began, and I quote, "Appearances often deceive, but in one respect at least, the visitor's first impression of Chicago is likely to be correct. This is a city buzzing with life, humming with prosperity, sparkling with new buildings, new sculptures, new parks, and generally excluding vitality. We took those scary stories 30 years ago, literally rewrote the ending. We did that by creating a vision of what kind of city Chicago could become, and then working relentlessly to get there. Obviously, we still face many challenges. So let me conclude by discussing briefly the major issues that future mayors will confront. The hardest challenge, obviously, is our fiscal. As all you know, we are finally emerging from the most serious economic disruption since the Great Depression. Future mayors cannot tax our way back to fiscal good health for many of the reasons I've discussed here tonight. Talented people can live anywhere. Capital can move anywhere. Business can move across the border to another country, another state, or another city. We have to have a competitive tax and regulatory environment. The state of Illinois has just made that harder with the income tax hike and regulations without cutting spending. We don't have to have the lowest taxes because then we can't provide the services and quality of life that are so important in the 21st century. We will have to focus on something that you don't hear associated often with government: value. What can we deliver to taxpayers in terms of the services and infrastructure related to what they are paying for? And not just the current taxpayers, but future taxpayers too. We can't make today's budget work by leaving the bills for tomorrow. Good value for the taxpayers is what we will win today in a global competitive environment. And to do that, we're going to have to continue thinking about government differently. We'll need to partner with the private sector. We'll have to examine what services really have to be done by government. We'll have to look at every government service and every government employee, make sure they're operating as productively as possible. None of this should sound unfamiliar. It's what most private sector firms have been doing for decades in order to stay competitive in the global economy. Future mayors must continue to force relentlessly on the middle class. The focus of cities will always be the place where our most disadvantaged population try to get to, because it's the easiest place to find affordable housing or to get around in public transportation. That's one benefit of density. Cities will always be a very comfortable place for those who are well off, because cities are home to the world's finest stores, restaurants, and culture, and that's a benefit of density too. But no city can be truly healthy without being an attractive place for everyone along the economic spectrum. Are we moving our most disadvantaged residents into middle class? Can families already in the middle class, and therefore with lots of other options, comfortably and happily call the city, Chicago, their home? This has been my most important priority for our city. Future mayors must remember that Chicago is part of a vibrant region. A process firm in Glenview or Oak Brook makes for a better Chicago. At the same time, the region can't prosper in the long run without a healthy Chicago at the core. Future mayors must keep the trains running on time, the planes at O'Hare, the cars in the Kennedy, and the CTA buses. Even at tough fiscal times, we have to invest in the tracks on which the private sector runs literally and figuratively. Last month, President Hu visited our great city. One of the local newspapers called it a coup that Chicago was the only stop the president made in the United States besides Washington, D.C. And we were very honored. We were very honored that he came here. The question is, why did he come here? His visit was a result in part of very hard work we have done in recent years to build cultural and economic connections between Chicago and China. Chicago has enjoyed sister city relationship with Shanghai and Shenyang for more than 25 years. We've hosted each other's visitors, exchanged art, music, shared business ideas, technology, and medical expertise. I've traveled to China more than once over the last 6 years. I've met with business and civic leaders as well as government officials. In many ways, President Hu's visit to Chicago sums up everything that I've discussed tonight. We took President Hu to Walter Payton College Prep High School, where he met some of the thousands of Chicago public school students who are studying Chinese language and culture. At Walter Payton, globalization, innovation, and technology all were important parts of the approach to teaching and learning. President Hu came to Chicago because our city is perceived as the most China-friendly city in the nation, a crucial gateway to the robust, diverse economy of the American Midwest. President Hu came to Chicago because of our pro-business outlook, which is something we have maintained in Chicago since I have become mayor. In short, President Hu came to Chicago because all of that we have achieved in the past and because of our promised economic future. I want to thank you very much for this wonderful invitation. Thank you for working with me over the last 2 decades to build this great city and this great region. It has been an honor to serve you as the 45th mayor of the city of Chicago. I want to thank you for the commitment you have made individually and collectively to this great city. I firmly believe the future is brighter every day because people like yourself, who not only go to work, but give your time and effort and money to make this city a global city. I am very proud of what the business and civic community has made Chicago. We are the envy of the world, but most importantly, I thank you for making me a better mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, for those terrific remarks. You've had a chance to see the extraordinary love that the Economic Club has for you and your leadership and for Maggie. And it's just a wonderful outpouring of support and love. As you know now, we have to go over to the Grand Ballroom for the Q&A, and it'll be broadcast on these large screens, and hope all of you can stay and look forward to our next meeting. But we'll go over and do the Q&A now. Thank you very much.
Marshall? How are you, Marshall?
Well, thank you. Good. So, to start with, Mayor, a lot of the folks here at the Economic Club are entrepreneurs. They're business leaders. They have to attract talent and retain talent. You've done an extraordinary job of finding terrific talent and getting them to come and work with you and stick with you. And how have you been able to do that?
Well, through the efforts of the business community and non-for-profit who I worked very closely with over the years, who made recommendations and worked with us in regards to placing people in different positions in government. At the same time, the Civic Consultant Alliance coming in to evaluate the operations of government, waste, inefficiency, fraud, corruption, anything, to really help us look at things differently. Many times government gets so bureaucratic because of laws, rules, and regulations and the bureaucracy. And what happens, you have to constantly fight that. It takes place in every form of government, even the private sector. So you have to be a tough taskmaster, and you have to go after it continually because it reappears. It could reappear in 6 months. So you have to look for talented people. At the same time, you have to look at efforts of the business community providing names and people to recommend.
When you interview somebody, what do you look for? What are the key attributes?
Well, you look at it, you have to look at, besides their willingness to work longer and harder at less salary, they have to be encouraged about doing it. This is not a 9-to-5 job. This has to be passion involved in government, with a lot of sometimes disappointments, but you have to keep your eye on your mission. Many times people get caught in tangents and they lose a mission both in government and both in the private sector. So you have to make sure they understand their mission and what they're supposed to accomplish. The best thing I did when I became mayor, you ask people what they do. You ask them, here, give me a piece of paper and say, write down what you do in 8 hours. It's amazing what people tell you what they do. Sometimes it's very disappointing. It's amazing what they say, what they do in 8 hours. And then you look at this and you say, is this the person I'm going to keep, or is this the person I'm going to hire? And then you evaluate them from there.
You've been able to get people to stick with you for the long term. You know, you've had people work for you, they go and run agencies, come back and work for you, go to Washington, do kind of extraordinary things. How do you keep people excited about sticking with you for the long run?
Well, I think what makes exciting is Chicago. I really believe that. Washington is not part of America. You know that. It is. It isn't. It's a bureaucracy that lives by itself. And it doesn't matter if they're Democrats or Republicans, it constantly survives. It's outside what we expect here in America. They don't feel the recession. We only feel it. And so many times people go to work there, can't get things done. It's so difficult to get things done because of the laws and rules and regulations and court decisions over the functions of the federal government. And besides that, the federal government doesn't have balance. I love not to balance my budget in the city. I love to not balance my budget as a homeowner or as a citizen, but we can't do that. All of us have to balance our budget except the federal government, and that has become the major problem of this great recession, the lack of balancing the budget in the federal government.
And a lot of the business leaders here in the room have struggled over the years to find minority talent, women and people of color, to come into their organizations. You've done an extraordinary job of that, to bring in agency heads and executives from all walks of life, every race, religion. How have you been able to do that so well?
Well, you have to reach out to the community. As state's attorney of Cook County, I was part of the Black Prosecutors Association. We formed it with Glenn Carr, Norm Early, and a couple others, and Johnson from being a federal judge out of New York. And we formed that because when I was a state's attorney, there were very few African Americans as prosecutors. They all became defense lawyers. And I said, this is ridiculous. Great lawyers have to see both sides of some issue. So we went there. When I got elected in 1989, people forgot I only received about 6 or 8% of the African American vote because they were judging me according to standards of late Mayor Harold Washington. I had to earn to become their mayor. And every day and every week, I made an effort to make sure that I was going to become their mayor and to look for talented people out there. There are talented people all over, and you go and look for them, both in the private sector and not-for-profit, and they're there here in the city and across. So diversity is here, and diversity is good for the city and good for this country and the world.
You mentioned you'd been state's attorney. You're trained as a lawyer, but you've worked so hard at beautifying the city. You have this extraordinary vision of how to make the city look terrific. Where did that come from? How did you learn that?
Well, I always believe that nature can coexist in an urban environment. We can coexist. We some way forgot in America that cities is only for the business, and then you some way go out into the rural areas and enjoy nature. So I said the nature can coexist in a city. with our beautiful lakefront, with our boulevards and our parks, our downtown area. We can do this. And that's what you have to believe. Not just planting trees for the beauty, but for the environment. Doing rooftop gardens, doing wonderful parks, expanding open space, providing better opportunities along the lake, and looking at parks differently, that nature can coexist. And the environment is a plus for us. We in the Midwest are fortunate to have the largest fresh body of water in the world. You think about manufacturing, you think of great opportunities, and the rest of the world needs water. Manufacturing needs water. And that's why through the use of technology, manufacturing is going to come back in the Midwest in a different way and much more environmentally friendly in the discharge into water.
When you first got elected, it was over 20 years ago, how has your leadership style evolved and changed over this 20-year period?
Well, one thing I've stayed the course of a mission. People get caught on tangents, and they go on tangents. And once you go on tangents, you lose the core mission. The core mission of a city is to educate people. And that's why in '95, I took responsibility for the public schools. And I think it's the most challenging problem even today, but we never can give up on that. If we give up on our children, we give up on their future. And every child deserves a good quality education. That's why I thank the business community for charter schools. I thank the business community for supporting me on all the changes we made in our school system. But it's a challenge every day. And be not afraid of these challenges. Be not afraid of the opposition. But it's we have to save our children. And America can do a better job in education, not by the talk, and not just by a lot of money, but mentoring students, making sure that students have a learning environment in their home, in the community, and the future will belong to America. We should not be afraid of what's taking place in the world. And the way you do it is through education, and you focus on that. The other thing I'm very proud of is Chicago Housing Authority. As you all know, it was built in the 30s. It was built after the Second World War. The expansion of African Americans coming from the South came up to cities, St. Louis, Detroit, Cleveland, Philadelphia, for a better way of life, and they achieved a better way of life. The high-rises that were built in 1959, Senator Paul Douglas, who our U.S. Senator, and Mayor Richard J. Daley went to Washington to appeal to the government under Eisenhower to say high-rises are not good for rural people who are large families for the first time coming to a city. That is the wrong direction. Of course, the federal government process said we're going to do it. The federal government then came up in the 60s that if you're working, you can't live in public housing. The poorest of the poor can only live. Then they said if you get married, you lose all your benefits. We created an underclass by the federal government policies in America, and it failed. So in 1999, President Clinton gave me responsibility for the Chicago Housing Authority. Again, all my political people said, this is the end of you. This is the end. You have nothing in common with these people. I said, yes, I do have common. I am their mayor. When I drive down a street, I look on one side, the street looks good. On the other side, it's public housing. We can do a better job. President Bush gets elected. Was at the end of it, I went to see him, and I asked him one thing. Mr. President, I want to rebuild the lives of people. I don't want to build a home for them. I want alcohol drug treatment, early childhood job training. I need programs for people to rebuild their lives. It's not a housing project. He signed on board, and I have to give him credit. Every Secretary of Housing under President Bush gave me more money than any other mayor to rebuild the lives of people. I thank the 25 leaders of the Housing Authority, mostly women, who said, Mayor, everybody's lied to me in the past. What are we going to do? I said, well, from today on, we're going to work together. And every year, Christmas, they come back and they say, Mayor, thank you for not maybe helping me, but you helped my grandchild. You helped the future of another generation. It was lost. It's going to change. And that's why you have to thank many people across the city who firmly believed in an underclass that we can make them a much better quality of life.
So over the 20 years, what have been the biggest surprises for you as a manager and a leader?
Well, I think the biggest prize is taking place right now. right now what happened in Tunisia and what happened in Egypt. The quickness of information, the quickness of ideas can spread so rapidly around the world that this is a whole different century. We're going to experience things that are going to happen so quickly. We're the last generation. It shows you military cannot accomplish what people accomplished in Tunisia or what they accomplished in Egypt. We have to refocus ideas. We have to refocus on people to people in the world. And this country represents the world. Every immigrant is in our country today. And that's what we have to refocus on our national policy. It's people to people, and it's not the military anymore.
And then what would be your biggest frustrations, your biggest disappointments as mayor?
Well, I think everybody has frustrations and disappointments in life. But if you allow them to overcome you, then you can never see something positive in what you want to do in life. So you'll have frustrations, you have disappointments. And the most frustrating thing I had in my political life was a lack of America understanding that guns kill people. And to see families who come to me who lost their loved ones. And I'm not talking about taking guns away from anybody, but just the idea that we think that guns can solve all the problems of America in the streets, in our homes, in any place. And I disagree with that. I firmly believe that we're a much greater nation, that we have 280 million people have guns in America. They want to carry concealed weapons, AK-47s, shotguns, everything imaginable. But we don't have the willingness to come forward as a nation. I know the gun manufacturers have bought all the politicians off. But some way in this century, we're killing our own. How can we as a country tell people how to live when we kill our own on a daily basis and injure them by gun violence? And I think America has to be able to do something. There has to be more courage by Americans. The other day at a press conference, and all the family members got up, police officers, families from children, young children get up, and they tell these stories about how their loved one was killed. They ask a question, why? Why did the government fail us? Why did the business community fail us? Why are we killing our own? And to me, that's the greatest disappointment that I've had in my political career. My father put a bill in 1930 in Springfield to outlaw ban guns. And today, we are still fighting the fight in regards to gun violence in America. And this nation should do a much better job on it.
You have a reputation for being decisive. You're comfortable making big decisions. Can you talk about one key decision you're very proud of, and is there one decision maybe you would like to do over?
Maxfield, no. No, I think the decision of going forward with the public schools. I think that was, when my political expert said to me, it's the end of your political career. No other mayor has done this in the history of the country. You're gone, you're going to lose. I said, you know what? I'd rather lose my political career if I can educate one child. Because my parents taught me, we'll give you your name, we'll give you moral values, we're going to give you an education. To me, if you give someone an education, you give them tools for life. If you don't give them an education, they're dependent upon government for life. And America should not have anybody depend upon government for life.
And then, is there a decision that you would, if you could do it over again, that you think about that?
Well, that's very difficult. What would you do over with? When you get the set of facts at a time and place, a lot of things would change in history. If you look at now, you look back, and you can't say that, because you only take the facts, recommendations, and you make the decision on what you know then. 5 years later, or a year later, 2 months later, it could be something different. And that's what life is all about. You don't look back, you look forward. But always, if you make a mistake, you can correct it. You can always correct a mistake. If you never make a decision, you can't correct anything in your life.
It's been reported that you'd like to possibly teach once you're done with your tenure as mayor. What are the key lessons you would like to impart on tomorrow's leaders and business executives?
Well, I think everybody's a leader. You don't have to go into government to be a leader in government and all this. I think everybody is a leader in their own right. And so Chicago Cares, a Civic Consultant Alliance, business community coming together to help government forge a coalition of bringing technology companies to the city of Chicago, working with charter schools or contract schools, working with the environment. People in Chicago can participate in any fashion they want. And to me, that is the greatest ingredient that we have in Chicago. And I will spirit that people want to give their time, money, and effort to improve the quality of life. And I think that's what you have to do as a city. And what you look at people or anyone else is that it is that willingness to do it. And you have to love what you're doing. You cannot have today America seems like people just have a job. You have to have passion in things you do. Otherwise, life gets boring. And I've had passion for government. I've had passion for many things. You have to have it. Otherwise, it gets very boring. And it gets too regulated by government employees, federal policies, or state policies, or city policies, and rules and regulations. It's not flexible, and government has to be flexible. And to me, government's going to change quickly. If it doesn't, it will live in the past. And America cannot compete with a global economy changing in the world, and their governments have changed.
Can you talk to us about some of your life experiences or key people that you've run across in your life that have had tremendous impact on you and helped to lead you to this great success you've had as
Well,
mayor?
first of all, my grandfather, who I don't know if he ever graduated from high school, but he knew more algebra and geometry than anybody else in my life. He was a sheet metal worker, and he would sit with me. And my father and my mother gave me an environment at home, moral values, a work ethic, and a belief that education is the answer. All my brothers and sisters, he said, I'm going to give you your name, moral values, and education, and you do what you want to do in life. I think the greatest gift that we can give to our children is an education, and we have to do a much better job in America.
The Questions Committee had a lot of thoughts around your sort of personal life and sort of wondering what are you going to do next? Everyone's interested.
Yeah,
We've read about it. We want to really hear from you.
It's interesting. May 16th, a new mayor comes in. I will have 32 years of a schedule of my life. Now think of that, 32 years of every day is scheduled. And it's really interesting. I always work 6-7 days a week, and I thought I'd never be like my father, and my father worked 7 days a week. So you're working 7 days a week until getting elected mayor, and Maggie said, could you take one day off? And I said, okay, we'll take one day off. It was interesting. My father just gave me a work ethic about whatever you do in life, do your best, and then don't do it. And so he said, when I decided to go into government, after I was in the private practice, and I went to see him, and he said, you're asking me permission? I can't give you permission. The only person who's ever going to make that decision will be you and Maggie. And you'll never, ever talk to me about your decision, to me or to your mother, about what you want to do in life. You go ahead and do what you want. Best advice we can give to our children, and the best advice my father ever gave to me. And when I decided to go into government, it was the best decision I made because I enjoyed every minute of it. Every minute of being state senator and state's attorney and mayor of the city of Chicago. I have no regrets. I loved every minute of the day. What I'm going to do in the future, that would, well, like anything else, you look at opportunities. Of course, I enjoy students. I've enjoyed always listening to another generation about what they want to have in their city, in their country, in the world. To me, that's the great benefit that we can all receive from another generation. And I'll be looking at opportunities. It's my number. No, I'm just kidding. I'll be looking at different opportunities coming up. So,
you talked about how much you've loved your job. What about it have you really loved the most?
People. No, it's people that make a difference. I mean, I've been to meetings and people shouting, yelling at me, screaming at me. I get up, go outside, they come over and talk to me. And I said, why were you so mad about it? Well, Rich, I want to make sure you know it. I got your message. It was really funny. And I talk to them and all this, and then, and I just meet them, and, and they want to make sure I heard the message. I got the message, don't worry. And they repeat it and repeat it. And I've always went out there to talk to them. Even sometimes people you think they would never
even respect me or I respect them, I always went out there and listened to them. It's amazing. And the concerns are legitimate. Their concerns were legitimate at all times. So I never took anything personal. You don't, if you take things personal, then you can never stay on the course of your mission in life. And so I never took any of these things personal, what they ever said about me.
Several people have asked about if you hadn't become mayor, if you decided not to get into government, what kind of a career path do you think you would have?
Well, actually, in 1989, I was just elected state's attorney of Cook County, re-elected the third time, and I was going to leave very shortly. I love being the prosecutor, but I to me, I had to do something different. If Mayor Harold Washington did not die in office, I would not ever run for mayor. I would have gone, I always wanted to go into manufacturing. I think manufacturing with technology, the workforce that we have here, the water supply and things like that, and we can do things. I think America can rebuild the economy through manufacturing with technology. But one of the things we don't have today is if you go to any business school, we don't teach them manufacturing. We don't teach them logistics or retailing. And one of the problems in our business school is that we're not thinking about manufacturing. And you can have good manufacturing with technology and compete in the world. We have lost that. Our business schools are all finance. And I understand that, but there's more to cities and the more to the world. The key is the manufacturing. I always want to go into manufacturing because I had the opportunity in the private practice to work with an individual that acquired quite a bit of manufacturing in the Midwest. And I had the privilege of working with him and my brother and others on many of his projects.
You know, one of your great legacies is you have this extraordinary family. And I'm curious, you know, what kind of values have you been able to instill in your kids, you and Maggie, because they've been so successful and so loved in Chicago?
Well, I think all of us try to instill in our family is the values that you receive from your parents and your family, extended family. The key is education. To me, the greatest gift besides the values you give to your children is that education. I think that is, and you sacrifice for them. And we sacrificed because I was living on a government salary, and so you had to sacrifice, and we did sacrifice for our children. And that's the only way you do it for your children, for education. If you don't, you shortchange them in the long run.
I know some of your children are concerned about your driving in this new world. You've had a whole lifetime now, 20 years. I
still got my license. Yes, I haven't driven since 1980. It's going to be a shock for everyone. Maybe a golf cart, they keep telling me. You can drive a golf cart. No.
So we'll be okay to...
I think so, yes, okay. We'll be okay.
As you think about the future, what do you think will be the toughest thing is you have a new mayor coming in the first 6 months? What will be their surprise? What will be the thing that they need to be looking out for? You know, the president always leaves a little note for the next president. I'm curious, what kind of note would you be leaving for the next mayor?
What happens is when you see government change, you see Washington, one day everybody's here, everybody's gone. It can't happen that way. And so I hope with the next mayor that there has to be a good transition. It's not a weekend, it's not a day or 2 days. There has to be an ongoing transition of government. Otherwise, one day you're here and everybody walks out. You can't run government. Who runs it then is the bureaucrats. Who runs all the decisions then? You lose control of decision making. And so we hope with the next mayor that there be a wonderful transition from each department, in evaluating department. Civic Consultant Alliance will work with us on that. We have an audit on financing. We have good people looking at the financial end of it, as well as the operation of the city, plans that are set already, projects that are ready to go. So in the same time that the mayor will have the opportunity to work with everyone. It just can't be you walk in and a whole new team. You can't. You have to transition it. If you don't, then who really loses is the next mayor. And that's what you have to do. I will not be the mayor. I will not be an advisor to the mayor. You only have one mayor, and that is the only one that exists on the fifth floor, no one else. And my position will be whatever the mayor wants me to do, I will do on behalf of the city.
And as you think out over the long term, what do you think you'll be remembered for most? What will be your legacy? Everyone wants to know
Everybody
that.
writes these legacies. I don't know why people are caught up with all their legacies. I tell you the truth, just go on with life and do what you can do in life, and let some other people will judge you. But I think America has to get back on believing in themselves. We have become a country of whiners. We whine about everything. I really mean that. We used to blame the Japanese in the 1970s for everything. Oh, we're losing America to the Japanese. Then we start blaming the Mexicans. Now we're blaming the Chinese. Why do we have to blame anyone? This is a diverse country. We have great opportunities here. We can compete with the world. We can. But everybody's talking about a decline or fall, everything. We should be able to, we're flexible, change, adapt. This country survived this way. And why are we losing confidence in America? And that really worries me. We should have more confidence in the next generation, I do, than any other generation. The next generation will be a better generation. And you can see that in all the positions they've taken in the military. Men and women have gone who volunteered to go to Iraq and Afghanistan. Just think of that. They have volunteered for America. And we don't understand the greatness of young people in one generation. I think America should get back believing in one another, and making sure the business in America are not the enemy of America. They employ people. They pay local, state, and federal taxes. We should be believing that the businesses provide a better way of life than government. They're the ones who give us the opportunities. It isn't government, it's business. And we have to get back in doing that with the separation. If we don't do it, I think we fall into always complaining about someone else. And we should not do that. We should be leaders in our own right to rebuild America, and we can do it.
But it seems like you've done not only an extraordinary job of leading the city the last 21 years, but I think leaving this footprint. I think that you've kind of, left there's a plan that people can see what you've done, and they can see where you're building, and I think it's kind of unique that I think the next leader is going to follow so many of the initiatives that you've had.
I think that a lot of initiatives, not just the mayor, but the business community and not-for-profit community organizations have all come up with ideas. It's the idea of implementing them as quickly as possible. And this deep recession has everybody kind of suspect of one another. We're not moving that we have to move. We have to be able to move the country. And the housing market is the most serious crisis facing America, every part of the country. And that is a major problem. And that's why we need a high-speed train from O'Hare Field downtown to rebuild our commercial and residential market. We'll be the only city in America that we have a high-speed train from our airport downtown. Now think of that. In this century, you go to Japan, they have them all. But we have to do it first. And Chicago has to do it first. If we do things like that, the downtown core of the city will grow stronger and faster in this deep recession.
Well, thank you very much. I think you've done an extraordinary job, as we've said this evening, just answering all the questions. I know the Economic Club and all of Chicago is going to miss you, and the legacy you leave is so extraordinary. So
I won't be leaving the city, John.
Okay. Well, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.